Hi, everybody. It's Chris F. Walker here with the Christian Influencer Convention, and I am just so excited that today we have got an apologist, a theologian, an evangelist, a jack of all trades when it comes to trying to live out faith and answer questions. One of my personal heroes at this point is joining us here, and his name is Jon McCray. Jon, it's so great to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me. And after that intro, I don't know if I can live up to the hype, but I appreciate it.
You know, the best part is you've got it. It's all in you, man. I've seen your stuff. All you got to do is open your mouth. It'll come out. So the big purpose today, you know, as you know, you're going to get to be one of the influencers who's going to be part of the Christian Influencer Convention. Is coming to Las Vegas on July 26th. And as one of the panelists, I'm really excited that we're going to get to do some live interaction questions, and you'll get to directly speak to people's questions on that event. But there's not a lot of time to really get into the story of you. And I wanted to make sure that we had a chance to learn kind of your testimony and how your story got to where you're at as far as what you do is creating content. And I just wanted to really get a chance to put all of that out there so that we can truly get some inspiration for other people who are trying to mimic, you know, similar results. So with that, why don't we start with the first question, which is, why don't you just tell us kind of how you got your start? How did you go from, you know, Jon McCray the kid to Jon McCray the apologist who's all over YouTube and social media everywhere?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So for me, I wasn't raised in a church-going home or anything like that, and we didn't really talk about faith at all in my family. So there wasn't a lot there, and I was first introduced to a church when I was 15 by my aunt. She brought us, and to keep a long story short on that end, that church ended up being kind of like a cult, right? So you know, they had a lot of weird kind of views. They were very, very legalistic. They said if we left the church, we'd be cursed, and so there was a lot of different things going on when it comes to that. But after we left that church, I have an identical twin brother, and me and him left that church, and then we were both kind of just agnostic a lot after that, where we kind of didn't really know if we believed in God, if we didn't, and I kind of went back and forth a lot until college, and I ended up taking a philosophy of religion class, which I didn't even know what philosophy was at that time. I just was like, I wanted to take a world religion class, and it was all full, so they said you can take philosophy of religion, so I ended up taking that class, and in that class is when I came to learn a lot of the arguments for God's existence. And I found myself particularly convinced by the Kalam cosmological argument. I felt like it was a persuasive argument. It made sense to me. Even after years of debating it afterwards and stuff, I still think it's a compelling, convincing argument. But that got me to believe in God. And then kind of to keep a long story short, after that, I came across evidence for the resurrection and ended up believing in Jesus after that, because I was convinced by the evidence for the historical resurrection. And so from there, to kind of fast forward to how I got my start in YouTube, I actually lost my hearing kind of randomly in my early 20s. My hearing just started going out, and I just noticed I couldn't hear that well, and it kept getting worse and worse, and the doctors didn't know what was causing it, what was going on. And for a while I put it off because I was like, I'm not going to wear a hearing aid until I'm like 40 at least, you know. So I was like, I don't want to wear hearing aids or nothing like that. And then eventually, like, it got so bad where they said I actually had 5% hearing left in this year and 10% left hearing in this year. And so it was so bad, I just had a very hard time getting around, talking to people. And so I ended up getting a cochlear implant, which is, if people aren't aware of it, there's an external and an internal component. And it's actually, you have to get surgery to have a chip drilled inside your skull with a magnet, and then you have an external component that you just attach onto it. So I ended up getting a cochlear implant, but the thing about cochlear implants is they don't, it's not like putting in contact lenses where you can just see once you put it on. It takes a very long time for you to learn how to hear all over again, because your entire nervous system has to literally relearn how to hear. And so it was about a process of over a year before I could start hearing pretty decently. And so during that time, I was doing tons of debates with atheists and stuff online and in Facebook groups. And so I was doing tons of debates, and because I couldn't interact with the rest of the world for the most part, because I couldn't hear, I was functionally deaf after that, because you lose your residual hearing after you have the surgery. So, but yeah, so anyways, I had about a year, and I was just doing debates and stuff. And there was some, and I started a Facebook group where I brought together a lot of the Christian apologists and stuff for debating and stuff. And one of the guys in the group was like, he's like, you need to start a YouTube channel. And he was a guy that lived in Australia. And at this point I was like, I don't really watch much YouTube. Like, kind of what's the point? And he's like, just, I'm going to buy you a camera. I'm going to send it to you. Just give it a shot and see how it goes. And so I did. And then, about 5-6 years later now, this is where I'm at. So
that's so awesome. Well, and so, I mean, now that you've had some time to kind of do that, is the hearing, I mean, that's an interesting question there. I've never even heard of this procedure before. So it works out well, and it's,
yeah, it's strange though, because like when you first get the surgery, you can't hear anything. Then you start hearing all the noises that you couldn't hear before, but you can't understand what they are because they're not intelligible, because your brain doesn't have anywhere to categorize them. And so they sound way different. This is why I know I don't hear like how other people hear, because things they sounded very mechanical at first. So it sounded like the old school dial-up modems. Everything kind of came in like that with like beeps and ticks and static noises. And then over time, as you keep working, they have these processes where it's like rehabilitation. You work every day to try to listen to stuff and try really hard to focus, which is really difficult because your brain stops listening and starts looking at other cues. So like I'll read lips and stuff like that, right? And so it's an exhausting process, but over time I started hearing a little bit more tone underneath the static more and more. But I know I still don't hear normal because like my wife and my like babies, their voices sound a lot alike, like my little kids. So I know that like there's only, I think it's like 8 channels or something where the human ear has, I can't remember the number, say like 100 and something different channels to hear different frequencies. So I hear fine now in terms of like hearing what's being said, but I'll never be able to hear like direction or distance again because you need both your ears to do that. As weird as that sounds.
Yes, I've actually, that's a whole world I don't know. I've never even had to experience anything in there. It's really interesting. Right. Okay, so now, and you mentioned that you basically had no faith of any kind as you grew up, and then eventually kind of started getting introduced to it. And I can almost relate to that in a lot of ways because I grew up very atheistic. There was no God. Like we didn't talk about him, we didn't acknowledge him, and anybody who believed in some fictional being up in the sky somewhere, we thought that was like loony bin stuff. So the fact I ever came around had very similar concept. It had to do with, is there evidence for this? And you said that it was the cosmological argument mostly that really did that for you. And for me, it was actually the origin argument. As you trace things back to eventually get to, in the concept of evolution, there's just too many breaks in the chain where evolution can't answer those questions, whereas creation makes sense. So I too kind of started having to go through that journey. So because of that, I actually have some questions that I hate to say it, they're kind of more personal towards me, but I want to hear your take on it because we have a similar concept there. And the first one is in your immediate realm of influence, your family, your friends, the people who've been with you for your whole life. What happened in those relationships as you started really saying, I actually think there's something to this Bible thing that's out there that's supposed to be the truth, and we never gave it any credit, but now it looks like there's actual legitimacy to it.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's kind of interesting because like my parents were, my parents were divorced pretty young, but both of them have been like pretty receptive to it. You know what I mean? They haven't really fought me against it. I think when I first converted, I was a lot more, when you first convert and you're just like super kind of aggressive and, kind of really like, super like that. And so I was like that a lot more. So I know that they were like way more concerned, but they didn't say too much. My identical twin brother, he doesn't believe right now too. I think he would say he's agnostic now currently. So that relationship, like we've talked about it a lot. It's harder when you have really close family members, because there's so much passion and emotion and complexity that's involved. So like we've talked about it a handful of times, but I try not to like, kind of just to the point where it's like our relationship is just so strained where he's not even going to come around, So I continue to pray for him and continue to talk with him here and there, But we can talk a little bit more now than we could back in the day. Like back in the day, it would always just get super heated,
Right.
And so that was kind of a bad start to it. You know what I mean? But now it's like, he knows what I do and stuff like that too, and he thinks it's cool. He just doesn't think he believes. But we've been talking more and more lately, and the conversations have been going better and better. So we'll see, man. I'm just praying that that he'll come saved,
Yeah,
so.
yeah, absolutely. And I know one of the biases I always had before coming to faith was that I almost had the preconception that you had to be someone, for lack of better words, who was very gullible or easily manipulated
Yeah.
in order to believe in
Yeah.
these things. And so I used to think that just the fact that you believe is a statement to
Yeah.
your inability to see truth. And which is so shocking because, now I'm such a flip on that. It's like I really believe there's only
Yeah.
one truth, and I was denying him implicitly. So
Right.
when it came to the relationships of how you interact, not just with your family, but friends and areas like that, how much of a shift did it change? Maybe not necessarily in the relationships anymore, but then in just your goals and your ambitions and where you were heading in life, because now literally your worldview's been turned upside down. And
Yeah.
so whatever you've been operating under, it's like changing an operating system on a computer. You got to learn this new system. It's not as fluid as it was before because you were used to the other one. And now there's,
Right.
there's incoherence. That's the wrong word. How about areas you just never experienced before, but now they play and they're relevant. So how did you start adopting the disciplines needed for overcoming those kinds of things?
Yeah, that was more of a process. And here's where it's like God had a lot to do with this directly, because I'd say prior to my loss of hearing, I was still like, really worldly a lot, you know what I mean, in a lot of ways, even though I was convinced. I mean, it takes, sometimes it takes like, having to put an end to some bad habits that can just be really, really hard to break, but I feel like I didn't take my faith as serious from an experiential level until actually starting my channel and then starting to think more and then talk more about the gospel and stuff. And like we ran me and one of my friends ran a Reasonable Faith chapter here in Denver, and so that would get me to start talking with more people. And then we had a guy particularly came in and was asking questions about the gospel, and he was trying to kind of trip us all up. He's just like, whoa, can somebody like Hitler go to heaven? And people would be all thrown off. But that made me start thinking more deeply about the gospel. And then once I started doing that, that's when everything really started to connect. I started just really like I went through the New Testament a few times, writing down all the scriptures that I thought were teaching works, and try to understand those in context of grace. And it really started trying to really work that out. And I got to a point where the gospel just started becoming more and more real to me and in my life. And so I started to see how the gospel is overlapping with everything. And so like you'll see there's even a shift in my channel after probably the first year or two, where I started moving into just talking about the gospel in every video. And the reason why is because it was so impactful for my life, where it really like started changing everything. And it was so unexpected. I didn't expect for it to change everything because like, to be honest, like even though I believed in Christianity and stuff, the Bible was still kind of hard for me to get through. It felt boring and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, after I started doing all this studying and thinking through this, it started just coming more and more to life. And then it just started shifting everything else in my life. So it was actually just kind of like a strange process in the sense that like I know C.S. Lewis wrote a book called Surprised by Joy, which I haven't read, but that's how I felt. I was like, I was surprised by the joy that really came from internalizing the gospel. And because it changed everything in my life, that's why I'm just talking about it in every video as much as I can.
Yeah, actually, in fact, I think it was in that book, if I'm not mistaken, that he coined one of the phrases that I related to so personally. Because when he talked about like agnostics, refer to the search for God as some sort of a search for happiness or a search for joy. And, when people are having misery in their life and they're just trying to find something that might give them happiness. And that's a viewpoint that some atheists or agnostics have, that's what they're viewing. And it's even possible that there are some people that's their journey for their goal, but that's not the truth behind it. And what I loved was how he responded to that was he said that you might as well talk about a mouse's search for a cat. Because we don't go out to seek these things, especially once you understand that the truth that you're now faced with means that you have to deal with the reality of who you are in relation to those. And there's cause and consequence, and there is a right and there is a wrong, and truth is true. It's an absolute, which means that if you fight against it, you're gonna be on the wrong end of this. And I thought that was just such a great way to put it, so elegantly.
I like that. I haven't read that. That's funny though.
I thought it was C.S. Lewis is kind of my personal He's my I don't know,
Yeah.
idol's the wrong word because you can't idolize me.
Yeah.
I look up to
Favorites.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Right. For sure.
he definitely went through a lot of the same things. His view of the world as an atheist was almost spot on to my own. And
Yeah.
so then when you say, what was it
That's
that
awesome.
took you to that? And so that's actually, let me ask you for me, the one question I get asked the most because of that background is, what was it that changed your mind? But there's such a journey involved in that what I finally learned is the answer is it's not an it, it's a who.
Yeah.
Who changed my mind is a different answer than, what it was. So with that in mind, then let's dive a little bit more into, we can learn about the gospel, and like you said, we can study it, but that doesn't give it a personal feeling, emotional attachment. So what was the journey there? How did you start really saying, it's not just that I believe in this, because even the demons believe in God, but how did I start saying I trust him and I believe that he's got even in the hardships, he's got my good intended? How did you come to that kind of a relationship?
Really, it was like, and again, it was a journey. I'd say part of it was seeing how the faithfulness of God in Scripture, and realizing that it wasn't my faithfulness that saves me or keeps me. Because if it was, then I would just, I would have lost my faith. I would have lost my salvation a million times, right? but the thing is, But what I realized was like taking the attention really kind of off of myself and really understanding what he did really helped free me to be able to start analyzing myself more with freedom. Like, for example, it's like a lot of us, like a natural mode for, I think, a lot of people, for a lot of Christians too in particular, is to look down on other people who aren't saved because we feel better than them in some sense, because we're like, we're living a good life, they're not, we have the truth, they don't, you know what I mean? And these sorts of things. But once I started realizing, I guess what that does, if we say like a true Christian wouldn't do X, Y, Z, which we tend to think that way, right? But then I thought about, like, when we start thinking that way, it really does limit us from being able to look inside, because we have to lie to ourselves in that sense. You're like, a true Christian wouldn't lie. Well, that means I don't lie, you know what I mean? And you start lying to yourself. But like the gospel really frees you from that, though, because it's like, no matter what, you're not saved based off of the works that you do. You're saved based off of the work that Christ did on the cross, right? And so that takes that pressure off, so you can actually be able to look inside and be more self-reflective and look inside and say, you know what? I am too big of a jerk to my wife or to my kids or whatever, you know what I mean? And you can analyze those things more honestly. And I think that really helps to kind of break down a lot of those kind of barriers. But I think I've lost sight of your question again. I'm sorry. Can you repeat it again?
No, actually, you're going on. But how did you end up?
Am I still on it? Okay.
Personalizing the relationship. You're down the rabbit hole.
That's right.
I just want to. So let's.
Yeah. No, that's right. That's good. So I so for me, it was a lot of rewiring, because it really is hard to get the gospel deep down there and really internalize it, right? It's hard because it's so easy for us to start resorting back to all of these different ways how we used to think. But me actually just seeing how, like, I guess like something like identity, I'm like, okay, I'm getting my value and identity from what I do in this way, right? And I know that that just shows that, like, I'm insecure, or even if I'm angry, I'm like, what is it that I'm trying to protect, where I'm getting value from that thing? And how would it look if I get that value from Christ instead, and what he said and what he did for us, like who Christ says I am rather than who I think I am. So like working through that mentally a lot too, really helped to kind of internalize that gospel message, and then grow in more and more to learn to lean and trust on Christ more and more, because you see these little practical things where it's like, where he's like, yeah, don't have sex before marriage. That doesn't make sense. It didn't to me, at least when I was younger, right? Sure. But now that I'm married and stuff and older, it makes a lot more sense, you know? So it's like, I could have trusted Christ here. Would I have known this back in the past? And you start seeing a lot more things like that, where sin is just really destructive, because it just hurts you and others, and your relationship with yourself, with God, your relationship with others and God, you know? And so those are kind of things that I've kind of realized too. So it really helps to kind of grow to learn to trust more in who Christ is and what he says. And then that really helps to, I think, propel your faith, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree more. That's beautifully spoken. I think I actually don't remember who coined the phrase, but there's a quote out there that says, everything in life is worth what the purchaser is willing to pay for it. And that's why I think when we hear a lot of Christians who are trying to, just like you said, they kind of stub their nose down on some people because they're like, oh, well, we've got the truth, the way, the light, but then they kind of think that puts them on the pedestal, and that's totally contrary to the actual calling of what the gospel is.
That's right.
So, I love that. For me, it was the why factor. It wasn't just enough to learn the elements; it was enough to learn the motive behind it. And as you learn the motive, every time you kind of go backwards and seek out the motive of why these actions are, or whatever, it always comes back to elements that are of the Spirit. And so, for example, love being one of the primary motives of God's everything He does, to include even His operation of how He enacts justice is actually still a matter of love in His case. Since we're on that, and you're in the same arena I am, I'd love to get your feedback on one of the biggest disconnects that I see between a lot of different teachings that happen is when people try to put into a camp God's love, and then they box that up in one area, and God's justice, and they box that up in another, and they act as though they operate independent of each other. And when that happens, it creates a conflict. So how would you kind of speak into that part? Because we have a perfect God who has to enact justice, but if He loves us, then how is He supposed to do so without condemning us?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as a little bit of a precursor for that, I've noticed that we tend to want to emphasize one of God's attributes and not emphasize the others. So, like some people, you'll see, like I want to say, can't think of his name right now, but there's some teachers that really emphasize God's love, but they're really soft on justice and the other things, right? And then even in some traditions, like Calvinists will really emphasize God's sovereignty, you know what I mean, above other attributes and stuff. So this is our kind of tendency. But what I think is, to answer your question, I think there too is, I think that's what makes the gospel so beautiful, because I don't see how you can have that in any other religion. You can't have a God who's truly loving and truly just, truly merciful and truly just. Like, these things are going to conflict, because when you think about a perfect judge is going to punish every single wrongdoing. You know what I mean? No matter what it is, a perfect judge is going to be perfect in justice. And that means enacting punishment on every single wrongdoing. But you also have mercy, right? And on mercy, a judge wants to forgive, but those things are going to be mutually exclusive. You can't have a judge that's perfect in justice and a judge that's perfect in mercy, unless we have it where we have at the cross. Because what happened at the cross was God was perfectly merciful, where He wanted to be able to make a way for us to be rightly related to Him. And so He does this by taking on human flesh and coming into our world, and then becoming a sacrifice for the things that we freely chose to do wrong, as a way. So now the justice is being enacted as the punishment that Christ willfully absorbed. But we also have the love and mercy on the other end. So they come together at the cross, which I think is one of the other aspects that make the gospel so beautiful. Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, that's one of the things that made it come alive for me, was when you finally understood that it wasn't just that the cross needed to happen. It was, all the way back at the beginning, when God built everything and said, it is good and this is how I want it. And then, sin enters in. He needed to find a way without changing it to accommodate for it. And that's what the cross does. In fact, it's the only way that works. In fact, even the virgin birth plays into that element. It had to be 100% man in terms of flesh, but couldn't come from the seed of man, which is what carries the sin along. And so virgin birth is actually a part of that element. And I mean, I don't think I could describe it any better than you just did. That's beautiful. Okay, so on that same premise, though, would then be in terms of sovereignty. Since you did bring that one up, and that's another element that a lot of people tend to do that. And just like you said, when people kind of put these camps and emphases on one element versus the others instead of the holistic view of God, we start seeing human habits kind of come into play there. So I think they call it the feel-good Christianity, if we focus on love. But then you don't account for justice. And then if you focus on justice, we start getting kind of more legalistic. And, you got to dot all the I's and cross the T's. And now it's really more on you than it is on God. But what I do love in God's sovereignty is and I'd love to hear your feedback on this, but one of the things that's always blown my mind is how can you be in absolute control and still have free will, handing the sovereignty of individuals to the individual, but still remain in control of the overall picture. So how would you kind of speak into that element?
Yeah, there's different approaches to this question, and this is where people can get into the different theology, like even like Molinism attempts to explain this through God's foreknowledge or his middle knowledge. His middle knowledge. So God would know what you would freely choose to do in different situations, but you freely choose to do them still, even though God knows and orchestrates the conditions in some sense where you're born into this time period in this area and this sort of thing. And he knows how you'll freely act. Therefore, he has complete sovereignty and control over everything that happens. I think that personally, I think that God, being made in his image, I think part of that entails us having at least free will when it comes to morality, at least in some sense. But I think that we do have free will. I think that God made a choice to allow us to have free will because God has free will. He allows for us to have free will. And so I think that there's going to be some consequences that come from that, like, for example, some of the evil that we see in the world, humans hurting other people and that sort of thing. I don't believe that God is the author of that. I know that's, some Calvinists believe that, but that's where I think we would disagree. I don't believe that God is the author of the evil and he's making people do evil things. I don't think that's the case. I do think that God allows us to have the free will to make choices, to be able to choose good or choose wrong. And I think that's the only way that love can truly operate as well. If we didn't have free will, I don't know what love means anymore, because love, I think, is especially, even agape love, it's a choice. It's an action choice that you choose, and so, but even just to have the experience of real love, like robots can't love you, you know what I mean? Like, I guess you can say they do in some sense, maybe just like, but they're programmed to do it. So it's not a rich love, I feel like. And so I think we have like the deepest love that comes from the ability for us to have free will. That's just my views. People disagree on that, but that's what I believe.
No, and I think I'm more on your camp than I am in some of the other ones out there, because I would agree that without the ability to choose to love, it's not love anyway. Yes. It's coerced. At that point, it's really more a factor of either fear or a simple lack of choice.
That's right. Yeah.
So, okay, well, let's focus now. This is what happens when you put two apologists together. Is we're just going to
right, yeah.
So let me focus back more on Jon here. So, what was, as far as you getting your start, and you kind of started making a YouTube channel and making things over, what was the changing factor where you said, you know what, this looks like it's going to be something that I could be able to focus on more holistically as opposed to just kind of making a hobby out of it? When did that shift come?
Yeah, well, I didn't think about the financial aspect too. It's like, well, you can make money through this, until I did one video where I got paid, was it like $800 off a video or something? It might have been something like that off the video I did on response to Lisa Gungor. It was like my first kind of viralish video. And I had a first check for like $800. I was like, well, actually, I didn't think about it, but you can actually like start turning this into a job. But it wasn't really my focus. I didn't really care as much because it was more of a kind of hobby and just me actually just trying to create stuff that I wanted to see, so a lot of the responses to memes and atheism and that sort of stuff, like I wanted to see some videos like that. So I just was creating those. But as time went on, I started making a little bit more. And then I was like, what could I do if I had more time to do this? You know what I mean? And especially because I had, one kid then, I don't think my second one was born yet, but after my second one came too and stuff, I was like, I'm going to be more limited on time. And so, I was like, maybe what would I be able to do if, God willing, I can just do this full time? And so I started kind of going towards that. And I remember setting myself a goal where I said, next year at this time, it was like on my birthday, it was in January, years ago now, but I said next year at this time, I want to be full time so that way I can dedicate more time to ministry and doing more stuff. Then the next year rolled by and I wasn't making enough. So I ended up still working more and more and more. And then it was the next year after that, I finally just put in my 3-month notice because I was trying to get myself ready. So it took me a few years because it was getting really hard towards the end too, of like having the family balancing everything while trying to balance the channel. So a couple years in, I think it was probably my third year in, is when I was able to go full time. So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
and praise God for that. Yeah, because that was a blessing as well. So
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. So and you've got, I know you've got one kid. How many kids do you have total?
3 boys.
Three
Yeah,
boys. Oh my gosh, that's
yeah,
so no wonder
yeah.
you still look skinny. You got to try and keep up with them. So
That's right. Yeah,
a lot of energy in that. Okay,
yeah.
so with the relationship element of it, with as your family was starting to come around, and like you said, even your brother's starting to kind of have some conversations with it now. What would you say would be some of the areas that you found have been the hardest obstacles to overcome when it comes to having these conversations? Because especially with
Yeah.
you and I are a little bit more direct with
Yeah.
our faith. There's a lot of people who do what I call sniper evangelism, which is where they're just living good lives, and then when people ask questions,
Right.
they'll try and share their faith.
Right.
But I'm more the one who's just
Yeah.
like, hey, I'm here to talk about God. So
Yeah.
how have you seen some of the big obstacles about where you get to speak, and more importantly, how do you handle the people that are kind of contrary to what it is you're trying to accomplish?
No, that's a great question. I think one of the biggest challenges is culture has shifted so drastically, even in the last 10, even the last 5 years, honestly. Culture has shifted so much where their kind of foundational beliefs, or you can say axioms, they're kind of axiomatic beliefs and foundational beliefs are so contrary to our classical kind of Christian approach that we kind of take. And so I think that because there's a language barrier there, like even for me, like I couldn't understand what in the world Christians were talking about most of the time because they were using a lot of church jargon, and I didn't know those words. I didn't grow up in the church, so they're like, "Yeah, you're saved by the blood of Jesus." I'm like, that sounds so weird, right? Like, what are you talking about? And so I think that there's a challenge there in terms of showing for our culture today, who's more individualistic. We want to try to show them why Christianity is relevant to their lives because they don't tend to understand that. If it's just abstract theology, people are just like, well, I don't really care because I'm trying to get a wife, or I'm trying to go on a date, or I'm trying to make money, or whatever. They have other things that they're focused about. So I think one of the bigger challenges is trying to find ways to bridge the gap between where culture is at currently and the gospel message. And so that's what I'm constantly trying to work out in videos. And so part of my channel is just experimentation, trying different things to see what kind of works and what doesn't, and thinking through areas where I ordinarily might not have thought through, and then trying some of those with people, you know what I mean? Like just talking to people. And I'm like you too, I'm comfortable being pretty straightforward with it. You know what I mean? As long as it's like, I'm not just being obnoxious about it, where I'm just making people uncomfortable and they want to get away. But like, I don't mind kind of just like jumping into the conversation. You know what I mean? That doesn't really bother me. But I think that like, just having an approach where people don't feel like objects. They actually feel like they're people that you care about. You know what I mean? Instead of just targets for a number for your evangelistic belt.
Right.
So
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
It's really
So I think.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay.
Oh, actually, I was just gonna say, so I think that that's a challenge for us today, is finding ways to bridge that gap.
Yeah, and I think that what I really like is that we're such a results-driven society now.
Right.
A lot of times people are. Don't get me wrong. It's not bad to have goals, and it's not bad to try and backwards plan to say these are the things I'm going to do and the steps I'm going to take to reach a certain thing. But a lot of times they become so fixated on it that they forget to remember that that's not life. Life is not a story of achievements. Life is a story of relationships, and life is a story of interaction. Right. And the achievements that we do are things that are, in addition to all of that. That's why I think the phrase that they always say is, on their deathbed, no one ever says, "I wish I spent more time at work."
That's right. Yeah.
So it's the relationships that they want to pour into.
Yeah.
And when you can focus on that relational side with the gospel message to try and remind them that but in a way, you almost have to show them the results-driven side of it so that they can see that there's something to it before they'll even acknowledge it. And it sounds like
that's a challenge.
Same wavelength there. Okay, so let me do story time here. What's one of your favorite examples of you just kind of showed up and you weren't even expecting it, and maybe somebody just threw out the wrong phrase or whatever, and it gave you an opportunity to speak into them, and I think the biggest hang up for a lot of people when they're talking about God is they always kind of think that it's on them to save someone, which is not true. That's Jesus's job. Our job is just to, talk, spread the seeds. So what's a good example where you just got to have a great conversation, and by the time they left, you were like, thank you, God, for letting me be part of that?
Yeah. That's a great question, because there's a lot of times where I've had those kind of conversations, and I'll usually see an opening when it comes to something that they're passionate about, right? And then showing them what I try to do in the most tactful way possible is to show them where, like, for example, where they're getting their value from is somewhere that's going to lead to bad results for them, where they're in a dangerous area where they can get crushed super easy, or they can just become too arrogant or whatever, and then try to show them how the gospel really suffices to be able to give you a stable identity that's not going to shift, and one that's not going to make you arrogant because you didn't do anything to earn your salvation. You know what I mean? So, I'm always kind of looking for those sorts of opportunities. I'm trying to think of one that one that kind of sticks out from a lot of the other ones. But this tends to happen. Even I had a friend come over, and he's a Christian, but still, like, we were able to work through a lot of the gospel for him too. And he came over probably a couple months ago, and then we just started talking about, like, because I didn't think that he saw himself as much of a sinner, like, so he didn't see the need for Christ as much, even though he like claims to be a believer, But we worked through some stuff and really got him to see just how, like, how much he needs a savior, you know what I mean? And so, like, he even was like thanking me a ton for it afterwards and stuff. He said it renewed his faith, but I think that, so things like that tend to kind of happen. I've also had some on the approach end. I used to run what was called a doubters club, where me and an atheist would sit down and, like, have discussions. And then a bunch of people just come to kind of listen in. And I remember even switching approaches, because I remember taking an approach, like, I was taking a super analytical, like, apologetic type approach to the topic that we were talking about. And it was on morality. But, like, I had a friend at the time who was like, he's like, don't, because I had, like, a diamond analogy that I think I might have gotten from William Lane Craig or somebody. And he's like, that's not going to really penetrate. He's like, the guy is really passionate about being bisexual. So he's like, so why don't you ask him about ethics around that? And then so, like, I tried both of our approaches. I tried mine first. The guy wasn't really that reactive. Then I tried the one my friend said, and just asking him, just because he was saying there was no objective morality. And so I was asking him, does that mean that people are wrong for bashing homosexuals or bisexual people? And then that really impacted him in a way that got him to stop and think. And then he started thinking more. And then he started being able to grant my premises. So that just shows from, like, an approach standpoint, where it's like you can make these adjustments to get to the point where people care about what you're saying, and then that can be a lot more impactful a lot of the times than just a straight analytic approach, because not everybody's wired that way. And right. I learned the hard way that, like, not too many people are, you know what I mean? Because I used to go give apologetics to everybody. I'm like, the kalam. And my neighbor's like, I don't care about the kalam. Like, it doesn't impact my life, And so, like, so I think really having a kind of a mix of these different things, the personal stuff, because humans are thinking, they're feeling, they're communal. So you want answers that are in all of these camps to be able to be sufficient in reaching the whole human.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. And I think one of my all-time favorite techniques, and I'm trying to remember the name of the book. I believe the name of the book is Tactics, and I can't remember the author's name right now.
It's Greg Koukl.
There you go.
Greg Koukl.
Yes. But what I loved was I think he called it the Columbo effect.
Yeah.
Was just, if we take your premise of what you're preaching and just turn it around and test it against your own self, does it work?
Yeah.
And
right.
if it works, then there's probably something to it. But 99 times out of 100, when you test it back against itself, just like you said with the, so if is it morally wrong then to bash homosexuals if there's no objective morality? Right. That's a perfect way of doing that. Right. Saying, you believe this, but do you live it? Is it actually applied to you? And we see that in a lot of stuff today. When we see a lot of the cancel culture that's going on, and people are just saying, well, since basically they view you as something that's not good for you, they just get rid of you. And I'm not trying to discredit, there's definitely times and places where there's certain relationships you probably shouldn't be in, and you do need to cut ties.
Right.
But there's also that element of we're relational creatures. And so if anybody is always on the chopping block, because I just got to wait for them to do something I don't like, then there's nobody who I'm going to actually allow myself to grow close to, because I'm just waiting for them to screw up, and then I can cut them loose. So with that,
no, I think that's good. Yeah.
Let's focus more then, as since we're kind of on that, morality and relationships. Let's focus into your family life, and how does faith play out at home? Because I don't know about you, but I mean, my wife is like the greatest person I've ever known. But there are times where she's looking at me going, "Babe, I don't need to be saved right now. I don't need to be evangelized to. Just tone it down a bit." So
yeah. That's definitely been a challenge. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been something I've been more conscious of, because, like, I'm always thinking so much. Like, my entire day, I'm thinking and responding to things. You know what I mean, and that sort of thing. And so, like, sometimes, like, of course, like, everybody knows this, but it's just hard for guys for some reason. But, like, sometimes women just want to vent. They don't want you to try to fix it right away. You know what I mean? And you don't have to, like, I'm always analyzing. I'm like, yeah, you're being inconsistent because you said this, but now you're doing this. Like, those sorts of things don't play out too well a lot of the times in marriage. So it's there's adjustments there, and and I still work on them, to be honest, because sometimes it's just my natural mode of thinking. Like, and I guess, like, I'm somewhat always just, like, approaching things, like, more analytically now than I think I used to be, because I'm just analyzing stuff constantly, but really just trying to balance out. I mean, just balance out, like, truth and love, and then understanding the human dynamic. Everybody isn't just rational robots. You know what I mean? Where you input information and then they just come to the conclusion. It doesn't work that way. So just keeping that in mind, and then just really trying to, resolve things with truth and compassion, I think is really important. So
that's beautiful. And it gives the example then for, when we have kids.
100%.
It's not even about me trying to teach. One thing I've learned about my sons is I can teach them a lot of things and they don't care. It's not going to sink in. But who I am and how I live my life, that's what they're going to pick up. And so it's a matter of I think the hypocrisy in what you preach versus what you do are the very things that our children look for.
Yeah, they do, and they'll notice too. They'll notice. So you can't fake Christianity in your house, because they will notice that.
That's right.
So that's important.
In fact, you're probably doing a disservice, because if there is a disconnect like that, that's what they're going to have a view of Christianity is. That it's it's not real enough to actually do it. So,
exactly. Yeah. Very. And how old are your kids?
I actually have 3 boys also. And
do you? Cool.
Yeah, I do. And they're 14, 12, and 10 right now. So.
Oh, that's awesome.
Depending on when this gets watched, that would probably change. But for now,
that's awesome.
I take that back. He's 15. Oh,
cool. I do that all the time. Yeah, you can forget those pretty easy when you got 3.
He's getting up there. So, and what's scary is I got to start teaching him how to drive soon. I even told him, there was times I was going on mission in the military where I was probably less scared than teaching you how to drive. So.
Yeah, for sure.
How old are your kids now then?
My kids are all younger, so they're not too much younger. My oldest is about to turn 9 next month. My middle one is 4, and our baby just turned 2. Oh. So so they're all kind of younger. But what I've realized, one of the things is I didn't realize how prominent a lot of the transgender stuff was in the younger generation, because even if all my neighbors and stuff, they've been talking about how their family is and stuff too, and they're mostly liberal. I live in Colorado; it's mostly liberal. Mm-hmm. But I didn't realize, like, how many things, like, all my my son's friends at school. I remember when he came home and told me his best friend, he found out was an atheist. His best friend's dad is transitioning, and he came and told me this. And then his other friend at school, he found out was an atheist. One of his friends at school try to kiss him. One of his guy friends tried to kiss him. Then the 2 girls that he liked hanging out with, they both said that they're transgender. And I was just like, there's a lot of the sexual aspects in culture today that wasn't there when we were little. You know what I mean? And so that's why I was asking about, like, your kids' age. They're a little older now, so they've probably made past a lot of that. But I think that's a new challenge today that I think we need a lot of people working on in an effective way, not just shaming or just assimilating. You know what I mean? It's like, instead we have to find a way to be more effective in working that, because I don't think that's something that's going to go away in any time. It's too ingrained. I didn't realize it till talking with so many other parents and seeing so many things even at my son's school alone, Sure. So anyways, that's what I think is going to be a challenge coming up forward for a lot of Christians and apologists.
And I think that and you did hit on, a lot of times when we see the controversial the controversy that's happening is it seems like the media in particular loves to just point out the conflicts as opposed to the people who are trying to actually compromise and say, well, compromise might not be the right word, but at least trying to open dialogue and say, I understand where you're coming from, but here's how I view it, and trying to get you to at least understand the other viewpoint as well. Because again, it's that in a way, it's people seem to be more fixated on gaining more, I guess, soldiers for their army, come to my side of this, than they are to try to say, let's explore the truth on this.
You're right, yeah.
And that's why
reaching people.
You already hit on one element, which was turning truth into an abstract as opposed to an absolute. So,
right.
In particular, since that kind of, in my opinion, that's become one of the root causes for a lot of these, is once you remove the need for an absolute, there's no end to human imagination, which means that once you remove the limitations of physical attributes that are absolute, everything becomes wide open at that point. But people still want their truth to be the truth, and they fight for it. So how do you try to kind of speak into that when people really embed themselves? How do you try to, like, it's not me trying to be against you. It's me trying to understand and trying to hope that you'll understand.
No, that's a great question. And this is something I used to think that as well, too, where it's like, if you don't have objective truth, it makes it really hard to reach anybody. That was my kind of thinking there. But then as I talked to more and more people, I found ways around that where I don't see it as big of a challenge right now, because the thing is like, we would all like for everybody to be like really like logical in their thinking, to follow the laws of logic and all these things. But it's not the case, because truth is moved more inside rather than external, and so one way that I kind of find around it is I look for, and I alluded to this earlier, but I look for those things that the people really care about and show them conflicts within themselves. Because if that's the case, it's not me versus you. It's you versus you. Right. You know what I mean? And so it's like, if they have, like, say they're really passionate about transgender rights and feminism, whatever, you know what I mean? And it doesn't matter what they are, but those are two things that are like mutually exclusive. So you just ask them the simple question, like tactics is like, just ask them like, what do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? That's the book we referenced earlier for people watching the book Tactics. Yeah. But you're asking them these questions because I've done that with people too. I'm just like, I was like, okay, I understand what you're saying, but how does that work with this and this? Then they're trying to find a way for you to help them resolve that tension. Then they're actually going to be open to listen to what you have to say, because you've caused that conflict by just asking them a question. You've really exposed the conflict, not caused it, but you've exposed the conflict that they weren't even aware of, and you put pressure on those things. Because I truly believe that all of the things that the world tries to say we're going to be fulfilled from, I think people are going to start realizing at some level there's tension there. It doesn't quite do what it was promised to do. And so where it fails to deliver, you want to put some pressure there so people can really see it and then have to deal with it themselves. And then you can have the ability to move them on to something else. So I don't think that we have to start with objective truth like I used to. I used to think we'd have to get them there first, but now I think it's the other way around. I think you can start with where they're at and then move them over to objective truth once they're open to seeing things a little bit differently.
Oh, it's beautiful. Great bit of wisdom there, because especially when it comes to and it's coming on the bottom of the hour here, so I want to make sure I honor your time, and I'll start trying to wrap this up. But I do want to point out that what you just described is probably the greatest tool, is just being able to have a conversation, listen to what they're saying, and then when you see the thing that's like, okay, well, that just doesn't seem like it jives correctly if you have this belief here and this action here, and they're conflicting each other. How do you atone for that? And put it in their court, let them be the ones that have to try to do that. Or I had one of my mentors once said that it's easy to call an iceberg when you see the tip. What it's hard to do is explain the whole thing away, because there's too much you can't see. And so he said, that's right. Best way to try and, unless you can dive below the surface, you'll never understand that full thing. So I thought that was a great way of giving an analogy for it. So, Jon, I do want to thank you for joining us. And I again, I almost feel like this is dangerous, putting two apologists into a room together and then filming it. That could be very detrimental to time, because I could probably do this all day. But
Right.
we're gonna get to see more of each other, and more importantly, you're gonna get to be directly asked questions at the Christian Influencer Convention. It's going to happen on July 26th. It's taking place at the South Point in Las Vegas, Nevada. There's going to be live music. There's going to be worship. There's going to be the panels, obviously. We're going to have meet and greet opportunities. There's going to be it's just going to be a really fun-filled and very packed day. So I'm excited about that. But because of that, I'm also glad that you were willing to take some time. I know you're really busy and you got a lot going on. So thank you for just carving out some time just to kind of share who you are and how you operate and why you're doing what you're doing. That's beautiful. Thank you just for sharing. We do
appreciate that, man. Yeah, and thanks for having me too, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for interviewing me and giving me the opportunity to join you in a conversation. So appreciate that.
Gorgeous. So I'm gonna go ahead and say, for all of you that were watching, thanks for joining in, and we'll see you guys here pretty soon. Other than that, looking forward to the July 26th day, and who knows what's going to happen afterwards, but we'll just leave that up in God's hands.